The rain pounded against the training facility's metal roof like 1,000 impatient fingers, drowning out the low hum of tension that filled the room. Sweat beaded on Sergeant Maya Chen's forehead as she knelt before the training device, her steady hands moving with surgical precision, while 23 men watched from a safe distance, their skeptical gazes heavier than the specialized bomb suit she'd worn earlier that morning. Fort Leonard Wood's Advanced Explosive Ordnance Disposal Program was the most elite in the military, and Maya was the only woman who had qualified in 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her mentor's words echoed in her mind as she carefully examined the complex mechanism before her. "You don't defuse bombs to prove a point, Maya," Lieutenant Colonel Jackson had told her during their final meeting before his deployment. "You defuse them because each one saved means lives that don't end today." But surrounded by combat veterans and career EOD technicians who seemed determined to see her fail, those lessons felt like distant memories from another life. The whispers started the moment she entered the training hall each morning, following her like persistent shadows. "Hey, Tinkerbell, sure you didn't make a wrong turn to the communications department?" Staff Sergeant Harris would call out, his voice carrying across the room. "Hope those pretty little fingers don't get too shaky when the timer starts ticking." The worst among them was Master Sergeant Victor Reynolds, a barrel-chested man with 4 combat tours and over 200 successful disposals under his belt, who had made it his personal mission to remind Maya daily that she was wasting everyone's valuable time and potentially endangering future missions. Reynolds had a habit of positioning himself just close enough during practical exercises to deliver his commentary like toxic vapor that couldn't be filtered out. "I just don't get it," he muttered that morning as Maya carefully assembled her tools for the day's exercise. "We've got real technicians begging to get into this program, and Command lets in some diversity hire because she scored well on a written test." Maya's hands remained perfectly steady as she selected a microcamera from her kit. She'd learned early in her military career that responding to provocations only provided more ammunition for her critics. Instead, she focused on her breathing, on the familiar weight of her tools, on the mock explosive device 30 feet away that required her complete attention. "Say what you want," she replied quietly, not looking up from her equipment check. "But when it's real, I'll be ready." Reynolds gave a dismissive chuckle, crossing his arms over his chest. "You'll wash out before we see anything close to real action. This isn't some theoretical puzzle, Princess. Out there, one wrong move means body bags." The other trainees snickered, but Maya tuned them out completely. She had more important things to focus on than fragile male egos. The qualification program was notoriously brutal. 16 weeks of advanced disposal techniques, electronics, chemical components, and tactical decision-making under extreme pressure. Only 6 specialists would graduate to receive their Master EOD certification. The rest would return to their regular units with shattered confidence and dreams. As Maya positioned herself before the training device, a sophisticated representation of a new insurgent design reported from overseas, she caught sight of the small photograph tucked inside her tool case. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, in his formal uniform, the same determined eyes she saw in her mirror every morning. He had believed in her abilities when no one else would. Now she was exactly where she belonged, even if everyone else refused to see it. The morning's qualification test began with each technician having 20 minutes to correctly identify, assess, and neutralize an unknown device under shifting conditions. Maya watched as Reynolds stepped up first, his movements confident but rigid as he worked through the problem. When the instructor called time, Reynolds had successfully rendered the device safe, but had missed a secondary triggering mechanism, a potentially fatal error in the field. He nodded with smug satisfaction regardless, as if his performance was beyond reproach. When Maya's turn came, the room fell into an unusual, anticipatory silence. She could feel their collective gaze like a physical weight, watching and waiting for her to falter, hoping for validation of their prejudice. She settled into position, controlled her breathing, and let everything else fade away. The device before her was complex. A main charge with 3 separate triggering mechanisms, including a collapsible circuit that would complete if tampered with incorrectly. 20 minutes later, she had identified and neutralized all components, including the hidden secondary trigger Reynolds had missed. The silence stretched longer than it should have as the instructor reviewed her work. Chen, excellent assessment and disposal. Clean execution on the collapsible circuit. Next trainee up, the instructor finally announced. But the damage was done. Maya had just announced herself as a serious contender for certification, and she could see it reflected in their faces. Surprise, grudging respect, and in Reynolds' case, something that looked dangerously close to contempt. As she packed away her tools, Maya knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, harder tests, and more opportunities for her fellow trainees to remind her that she didn't belong in their world. But she also knew something they didn't. She wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Week 3 brought advanced circuitry exercises, and Master Sergeant Reynolds wasted no time establishing the pecking order during the morning briefing. He announced team assignments for the upcoming electronic bypass simulation, a critical test where pairs of EOD technicians would attempt to defeat a series of escalating security measures protecting a sophisticated device. "Rodriguez, you're with Williams," Reynolds called out, pairing 2 of the program's strongest performers. "Harrison, take Stevens." "Franklin, you've got Davidson." Maya waited as the teams formed around her, knowing exactly what was coming but hoping she'd be wrong. "Chen," Reynolds finally said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of disdain. "You're with me." The announcement sent a ripple of uncomfortable murmuring through the group. Everyone understood that Reynolds had specifically requested Maya as his partner, not to mentor her or help her succeed, but to ensure she'd fail under his direct supervision. "Problem with that assignment, Chen?" Reynolds asked, noting her momentary hesitation. "No problem, Master Sergeant," Maya replied evenly. She had expected this eventually. Reynolds wasn't content to mock her from a distance. He wanted front-row seats to her downfall, wanted to be the one who could say he had personally witnessed her inadequacy. The electronic bypass exercise began promptly at 0800 hours. Each team had 90 minutes to work through 5 increasingly complex security systems without triggering the simulated detonation. Maya suggested they approach the first system by isolating the power source before attempting to defeat the continuity circuit. "Negative," Reynolds said immediately. "We're cutting the primary sensor wire and bridging the gap." Standard procedure. "Master Sergeant, respectfully, this looks like a parallel circuit with a dummy sensor. If we cut that wire, we'll complete the circuit instead of breaking it." Reynolds turned to face her fully, his expression cold and unyielding. "Chen, I've been doing this since before you could spell EOD. We're using my approach, and you're going to follow my lead without question. Are we clear?" Maya bit back her technical explanation. Military hierarchy was absolute, even when it was demonstrably wrong. "Crystal clear, Master Sergeant." The exercise proved disastrous, exactly as Maya had predicted. Within 20 minutes, they had triggered the simulated detonation on the first system. As they walked back to the assembly point in failure, Reynolds made sure his voice carried to the other teams. "Some people just aren't cut out for technical fieldwork," he announced. "Takes more than book smarts to be an EOD tech. You need practical instinct, and that's something you either have or you don't." Maya said nothing, but inside she burned with frustration. She had known the correct approach, had tried to voice it professionally, and been shut down. Now Reynolds was using their failure, his failure, as evidence of her inadequacy. Back at the barracks that evening, she overheard several conversations about her performance. "Maybe she's good at the theoretical stuff, but practical application is different," one trainee said. "Reynolds has a point about instinct versus book knowledge." Maya sat on her bunk, methodically cleaning her precision tools. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's last letter opened beside her. "You defuse bombs to save lives that don't end today. But what happened when the people you were meant to work alongside wouldn't let you do your job?" She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about proving her technical skills. Reynolds and others like him weren't just testing her ability, they were actively working to undermine it. And tomorrow would bring new opportunities for them to continue their campaign. But Maya Chen had not come this far to surrender now. If they wanted to play games, she'd already learned to win at their own level. By week 5, Reynolds had perfected his campaign of systematic undermining. It wasn't just the snide comments anymore. He'd evolved into something more calculated and dangerous. During equipment inspections, he'd find microscopic flaws in Maya's gear that he'd overlook in others. In classroom sessions on emerging threat intelligence, he'd single her out with impossible scenario questions designed to make her stumble. "Chen," he'd call out during a lecture on chemical detection protocols, "you've got a suspected TATP device with degraded components in a subway station. Ambient temperature is fluctuating, humidity at 80%, and you've got potential electronic interference from the third rail. Ventilation systems just kicked on. Walk me through your approach in 20 seconds or less." Even seasoned EOD technicians would need time to work through all those variables, but Maya had learned to stay razor-sharp under pressure. She'd provide the answer usually correct, only to have Reynolds find some minor technical point to criticize. "Close, but you failed to account for the nitrogen instability at those humidity levels." In a real situation, that's a crater where a city block used to be. The other trainees began to view Maya as a liability, not because of her actual performance. Her technical scores remained among the highest in the class, but because Reynolds' constant criticism created an atmosphere of doubt around her competence. If their senior instructor had no confidence in her abilities, perhaps they shouldn't either. The isolation was the hardest part. During mealtimes, conversations would quiet when she approached tables. Study groups formed without her inclusion. When specialized equipment was distributed, she'd find herself last in line, receiving whatever remained. It was Specialist James Harrison who finally verbalized what others were thinking. During a break between exercises, Maya overheard him talking to a group of trainees near the water cooler. "Look, I'm not saying anything against women in EOD," Harrison was saying, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who had rehearsed this speech. "It's just that when we're downrange and lives are on the line, you want to know the person next to you isn't going to freeze up. And if Reynolds has concerns about her stability under pressure, maybe he's seeing something we're not." Another trainee nodded in agreement. "Guy's got 4 combat deployments and over 200 successful disposals. If he thinks she's not ready, there's probably a reason." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Reynolds wasn't just trying to break her anymore. He was turning her potential teammates against her. In EOD work, trust was everything. A bomb disposal team required absolute confidence in each other's abilities. Without that trust, missions failed before they began. That evening, she found a note slipped under her door, unsigned, written in block letters. "Request transfer before someone dies because of you." Maya stared at the paper for a long time, then carefully folded it and placed it in her footlocker alongside Jackson's letter. Someone wanted her to believe she was alone, that everyone agreed she didn't belong, but she'd noticed something they probably hadn't. During the high-pressure live exercises, when noise and stress made it nearly impossible to think clearly, her performance remained consistently exceptional, while others made increasingly dangerous errors. While her classmates' execution declined under pressure, hers actually improved. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Their lead instructor announced that in 10 days, the class would participate in a full-scale disposal operation at the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, their final test before certification. Teams would be deployed to address realistic explosive threats with actual explosive materials and real-world conditions. "This exercise will determine who receives EOD Master Certification," the instructor explained. "You'll be evaluated not just on technical execution, but on threat assessment, decision-making under pressure, and team coordination." Maya looked around the room and saw the excitement on her classmates' faces. This was what they'd all been training for, the chance to prove themselves in conditions as close to combat as possible. Reynolds caught her eye from across the room and smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Maya realized with crystal clarity that the real test wouldn't be the exercise itself. It would be surviving whatever Reynolds had planned for her when they were in the field, with live explosives and minimal oversight. But she also realized something else. This was her opportunity to prove once and for all that she belonged here, not to Reynolds, not to her doubters, but to herself. The night before deployment to Dugway, Maya sat in the empty classroom reviewing technical schematics of known explosive devices. The proving grounds contained over 800,000 acres of unforgiving terrain, perfect for simulating the high-stakes environment of real-world disposal operations. Reynolds found her there at 0100 hours, his footsteps echoing in the empty room. Burning the midnight oil, Chen. He slid into the seat across from her, his voice carrying that familiar mockery. Just preparing, Master Sergeant. Maya kept her eyes on the schematics, refusing to be baited. You know, I've been thinking about team assignments for tomorrow's exercise. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, studying her with an unreadable expression. Command's giving me some discretion in how we organize the squads. Maya looked up, something in his tone setting off warning signals in her mind. I could put you with Rodriguez or Williams, guys who might carry you through the mission. Reynolds' smile was cold and calculating. Or I could make sure you're placed where your performance really matters, where there's no room for error. I don't need anyone to carry me, Master Sergeant. We'll see about that. Reynolds stood up. Because tomorrow, Chen, you're going to find out what happens when the training wheels come off. When it's just you, your tools, and a device that doesn't care about your feelings or your gender equality talking points. He paused at the door. Hope you've made peace with your limitations, because in about 12 hours everyone's going to see exactly what you're made of. After he left, Maya sat alone in the darkness, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the schematics. For months she'd endured the mockery, the isolation, the systematic attempts to undermine her confidence. She told herself it was just part of the process, that proving herself would eventually silence the doubters. But Reynolds' words felt different. They carried the weight of a promise, not just a threat. Tomorrow, in the remote testing grounds with live explosives and minimal oversight, he would have the opportunity to ensure her failure, permanently. Maya thought about the unsigned note in her footlocker, about the conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, about the growing conviction among her classmates that she was a dangerous liability. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's words. You defuse bombs because each one saved means lives that don't end today. But what happened when the people who were supposed to be your teammates were the ones trying to destroy you? She could request a transfer, take medical leave, find some honorable way to disappear before tomorrow's exercise. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Reynolds would get what he wanted, and she'd be alive to find another path forward. But as Maya sat in that empty classroom, surrounded by technical diagrams of devices designed to kill and maim, she realized something fundamental had changed inside her. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, a cold, steady anger that burned like a precisely calibrated flame. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to give Reynolds the satisfaction of watching her quit. And she wasn't going to let Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's faith in her be proven misplaced. Tomorrow, at Dugway Proving Grounds, with live explosives and real consequences, Maya Chen would discover exactly what she was made of. And so would everyone else. She gathered her materials carefully, secured her toolkit, and walked back to the barracks. In 6 hours, the transport would depart. In 10 hours, the exercise would begin. In 18 hours, everything would change. Maya spent the remaining time before dawn, inspecting her equipment with methodical precision, each motion automatic and calming. She checked her tools, reviewed her technical manuals, and prepared for what might be her final test as an EOD technician. But deep inside, beneath the fear and anticipation, a quiet voice whispered that this wasn't an ending at all. This was the moment she'd been training for her entire life, not just as a bomb disposal expert, but as a warrior who'd never been given permission to exist. Tomorrow, she'd stop asking for permission. The military transport vehicles departed at dawn, rumbling across the desert landscape toward Dugway Proving Grounds. Maya sat with her back straight, equipment case secured between her feet, watching the barren terrain roll past through dust-streaked windows. Across from her, Reynolds lounged with practiced ease, making jokes with the other trainees that seemed designed specifically to exclude her from the camaraderie. "This is where it gets real, gentlemen," Reynolds announced over the engine noise. "Time to separate the operators from the ornaments." Maya didn't react. She'd spent the journey studying the exercise parameters and communication protocols, memorizing the area map and emergency procedures. While Reynolds played to his audience, she was preparing for war. The exercise scenario was complex. Multiple teams would infiltrate designated sectors of the proving grounds to locate and neutralize a series of terrorist devices planted throughout the area. They'd be using actual explosive materials with reduced charges, but everything else was real. The terrain, the pressure, the consequences of failure. Maya found herself assigned to Bravo Team under Reynolds' direct command, exactly as he'd promised. The team included Harrison, Williams, and 2 other trainees she barely knew. As they geared up at the staging area, Reynolds made the dynamics crystal clear. "Chen, you're on perimeter security," he ordered. "Document and observe only. Don't approach any devices unless someone's bleeding out. Let the real EOD techs handle the disposals." Maya nodded without argument. She'd expected this. Reynolds wanted her relegated to the least important role, set up to fail when her limited responsibilities proved insufficient. But Maya had studied the exercise terrain extensively, and she knew something Reynolds didn't. Perimeter security would position her with the best vantage point of the entire team's movement and all potential device locations. 6 hours into the operation, Bravo team had successfully located and neutralized 2 simulated explosive devices, 1 standard pressure plate IED, and 1 timer-based package. They were making good progress toward their 3rd objective when Maya's radio crackled with an emergency transmission. "Control to all units," code read. "Real device detected in Sector 7. This is not a drill. Exercise terminated. Live explosive threat. Repeat, live threat. All personnel maintain position and await further instructions." The team froze. Reynolds grabbed his radio. "Say again, Control. Exercise terminated?" "Affirmative, Bravo team. Intelligence indicates domestic extremist group has infiltrated the range perimeter. Live devices planted, unknown number and configuration. New tasking, proceed to grid coordinates Echo 9 with extreme caution. EOD support inbound from regional headquarters, ETA 2 hours. Reynolds cursed under his breath. Live devices, outstanding. That's when the first real crisis hit. Harrison's voice came through the radio, tight with tension. "Bravo, actual, this is Bravo 3. I've got eyes on what appears to be a live device at my position, grid Delta 7. Definitely not part of the exercise. Multiple initiators visible, complex electronic package. Request immediate assistance. Hold position, Bravo 3. Do not approach. What's your nearest support?" There was a pause before Harrison responded. "That's the thing, sir. I've got what looks like a body about 10 meters from the device. Civilian clothes, not moving." Maya felt her blood run cold. This wasn't part of any exercise. This was real. Somewhere on this range, actual extremists had planted actual bombs, and at least one person was already down. Reynolds was already moving, waving the team forward. "Bravo team, converge on Bravo 3's position. Chen, maintain perimeter security. The rest of you with me." "Master Sergeant," Maya said, keeping her voice level. "I should assess the device. I have the highest technical scores in electronic countermeasures." "Negative," Reynolds snapped. "You'll stay back as ordered. This isn't a training scenario anymore." As they approached Harrison's position, Maya could see the tension in everyone's movements. This wasn't what any of them had signed up for today. Through her binoculars, she could make out a disturbing scene. A man in civilian clothing lying motionless near what appeared to be a metal case with wires extending from it. Even from this distance, she could tell this was a sophisticated device, nothing like the training scenarios they'd been running. Harrison was kneeling behind cover, his face pale. "It just looks wrong, sir. Nothing like our training devices." Reynolds approached cautiously, signaling the team to establish a perimeter. "Williams, get on the horn to Control. Tell them we need that EOD support expedited. Davidson, check if that civilian has a pulse, but don't get within 5 meters of the device." Maya watched from her position as Davidson carefully approached the downed civilian. "Sir, he's alive but unconscious. Looks like he might be part of the range staff. There's a Dugway ID clipped to his jacket." Reynolds knelt to examine the device from a safe distance, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "This is like nothing I've seen before. Multiple trigger mechanisms, possibly chemical and pressure sensitive. Could be rigged to detonate if tampered with incorrectly." He keyed his radio. "Control, this is Bravo Actual. We have a live, sophisticated device with an injured civilian in proximity. Request immediate medical evacuation and EOD support." The response was immediate and not encouraging. "Bravo Actual, nearest EOD unit is still 90 minutes out. Medical evac cannot approach until device is rendered safe." Reynolds cursed again, louder this time. "Sir, this civilian might not have 90 minutes. Maya continued observing through her binoculars, her mind racing. From her position, she could see details the others couldn't. The configuration of wires, the unusual power source, the multiple redundant triggers. This device wasn't just dangerous. It was deliberately designed to kill EOD technicians who attempted to disarm it. She recognized the configuration from an intelligence briefing 3 weeks earlier, a new design attributed to a domestic extremist with engineering background. 6 EOD technicians had already died attempting to disarm similar devices in the past month. Reynolds was on the radio again, his voice tense. Control. Request permission to attempt evacuation of the civilian. Negative, Bravo Actual. Too risky without device assessment. Hold position. Maya made her decision. She keyed her radio. Bravo Actual. This is Bravo 5. I recognize the device configuration. It's the Hendrix design, the one that killed the Salt Lake City EOD team last month. Reynolds' response was immediate and harsh. Chen, maintain your position and radio discipline. This is not the time. Master Sergeant, with respect, I'm the only one who completed the Advanced Electronics Countermeasures module. I've studied this exact configuration. There was a long pause before Reynolds responded. Negative, Chen. That's a direct order. Maintain your position. Maya looked at the scene before her. The sophisticated device, the injured civilian, her team frozen in indecision as valuable minutes ticked away. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's words about saving lives that don't end today. She keyed her radio one last time. Understood, Master Sergeant. Then she closed the channel, picked up her equipment, and began moving forward. Maya moved with purpose, each step calculated as she approached the scene. From the ridge where Reynolds had ordered her to stay, she could see what the others couldn't. The civilian's chest was barely moving, his breathing becoming more labored by the minute. Time was a luxury they didn't have. Chen! What the hell are you doing? Reynolds' voice crackled through her radio, but Maya had already switched to the secondary channel. She needed to focus without distraction. As she drew closer, the device's complexity became more apparent. This wasn't just a bomb, it was a statement, designed specifically to kill those who tried to disarm it. The Hendrix design had already claimed 6 EOD experts from the Salt Lake City unit, all of them with more field experience than Maya. But she had something they hadn't. She'd spent nights studying the intelligence reports, breaking down the theoretical components and countermeasures while her classmates were sleeping. Chen, I gave you a direct order. Reynolds was moving toward her now, his face contorted with anger. The rest of the team watched in stunned silence as Maya calmly set down her equipment case and began unpacking her specialized tools. Master Sergeant, she said without looking up, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, that civilian has approximately 15 minutes before his condition becomes critical. The EOD support is 90 minutes out. We both know what that math means. Reynolds stopped a few meters away, conflicted. Military protocol demanded he physically remove her from the scene, but approaching too close to an unknown device violated every safety procedure they'd been taught. This is that device from the Salt Lake City incident, Maya continued, carefully examining the trigger mechanisms without touching anything. Chemical initiator linked to a pressure plate with multiple redundant circuits. If we don't act now, that man dies. Reynolds' voice lowered, now only for her ears. And if you're wrong, we all die. Then I suggest you move the team back to minimum safe distance, she replied, finally meeting his gaze. I'm not leaving him to die when I know I can help. Something shifted in Reynolds' expression, not quite respect, but a reluctant acknowledgement. He hesitated, then keyed his radio. All Bravo elements fall back to 100 meters. Chen is attempting disposal. He paused, then added, and somebody find me a goddamn med kit. With the team at a safer distance, Maya focused entirely on the device before her. It was even more sophisticated up close. A primary explosive charge connected to at least 3 separate triggering mechanisms. The casing was partially transparent, revealing color-coded wires and what appeared to be a chemical trigger vial that would detonate if the case was moved or opened incorrectly. Maya took a deep breath and began the disposal protocol she'd rehearsed countless times in her mind. First, document everything. She used her micro camera to capture images from multiple angles, careful not to cast shadows or create vibrations. Next, assess the power source. This device appeared to have a main battery with a secondary cell that would activate if the primary was disconnected. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Each decision could be her last if miscalculated. Through her earpiece, she could hear Reynolds coordinating with Control, requesting additional medical support, and updating them on her unsanctioned disposal attempt. "The chemical trigger is the priority," she said aloud, partly to focus her thoughts, and partly so the team could hear her process through the radio. "If I can neutralize that, the electrical circuit becomes more manageable." Her hands moved with surgeon-like precision as she selected a specialized neutralizing agent from her kit. This was the most dangerous step. The chemical trigger was designed to detonate if exposed to the wrong counteragent. She'd need to identify the exact composition before applying anything. Maya extracted a miniature test kit from her equipment and carefully collected a microscopic sample from the air around the vial, using a specialized vacuum tool. The color-changing paper gave her the information she needed. The trigger was TATP-based, just as she'd suspected from the intelligence reports. "Initiating chemical neutralization," she announced, applying a stabilizing compound to the exterior of the trigger housing. The next 60 seconds would determine whether she'd correctly identified the composition. One miscalculation and the chemical reaction would cascade into detonation. The compound settled onto the surface of the vial, gradually changing color from clear to pale blue, indicating successful neutralization. Maya released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Chemical trigger stabilized," she reported, moving to the electrical components. The next challenge was the complex circuit board controlling the pressure plates. This was where the Salt Lake City team had failed. They'd cut what appeared to be the main power wire, only to discover too late that it was a decoy that completed the circuit when severed. Maya studied the wiring configuration carefully. The Hendrix design was known for its counterintuitive layout. Nothing was as it seemed. Standard EOD protocol wouldn't work here. She needed to think like the bomber. "If I were designing this to kill EOD techs," she murmured, "I'd make the obvious solution the fatal one." Her eyes followed each wire's path, mentally mapping the current flow. There, almost hidden beneath other components, was a hair-thin filament that didn't connect to any visible trigger. That had to be the master failsafe, designed to be overlooked. With steady hands, Maya selected micro-insulated clippers from her kit. She'd have one chance to get this right. If she cut the wrong wire or cut this one incorrectly, the device would detect the interruption and detonate instantly. "Isolating master failsafe," she announced. "This is the critical step." Before cutting, she applied a conductive gel to both sides of where she would make the cut, a technique not taught in standard EOD training, but one she'd developed in her own theoretical work. The gel would maintain electrical continuity while she inserted a bypass circuit, preventing the system from detecting the interruption. Initiating bypass now. Her hands didn't tremble as she connected the miniature circuit bridge and then carefully cut the master wire on either side of the bridge. The device gave no response, a good sign. The bypass was working. "Failsafe neutralized," Maya reported, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. Moving to final phase, power source disconnection. With the failsafe handled, she could now address the main power sources. This required simultaneously disconnecting both batteries to prevent either from activating the remaining triggers. It was a two-handed operation requiring perfect synchronization. Maya positioned her specialized tools over both power connections, executing power disconnection in 3, 2, 1. With a precise movement, she severed both connections simultaneously. The device's small indicator light flickered and went dark. For several agonizing seconds, Maya held her breath, waiting for any sign of a delayed trigger. When nothing happened, she carefully placed her tools down and exhaled slowly. "Device neutralized," she announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline crash beginning to hit her system. "I need medical assistance for the civilian immediately." The response was immediate. Reynolds and the medic rushed forward while the rest of the team maintained the safety perimeter. As they worked to stabilize the injured range technician, Maya methodically documented the defuse device, collecting evidence that would help identify whoever had planted it. Reynolds knelt beside her after ensuring the civilian was receiving proper care. For several moments he said nothing, just stared at the neutralized device. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual edge. That was the Hendricks design, he said quietly. The one that killed Jackson's entire team last month. Maya's hands froze over her documentation. Jackson's team? Lieutenant Colonel Jackson was in Salt Lake City? Reynolds looked at her with genuine surprise. You didn't know? Lieutenant Colonel Jackson was leading the Salt Lake City EOD response. He and 5 others died, trying to disarm a device identical to this one. He gestured to the defused bomb. That's why these training exercises were organized, to prepare for this exact threat. The world seemed to tilt under Maya. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, her mentor, the man who had believed in her when no one else would, had died trying to defeat this same device. The photograph in her toolkit, his final letter. He'd been gone for weeks, and somehow the news had never reached her. No one told me, she said, her voice barely audible. It was classified, Reynolds replied. Need-to-know basis only. We weren't supposed to know what we were really training for. Maya looked down at the neutralized device, understanding flooding through her. This hadn't been just any training exercise. It had been specifically designed to prepare them for the Hendricks threat, and she had just accomplished what 6 veteran EOD technicians, including her own mentor, had failed to do. The realization didn't bring triumph or vindication, only a hollow ache and the grim satisfaction that Jackson's killer wouldn't claim any more lives today. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, the distinctive thump of its rotors echoing across the desert. As the injured technician was loaded aboard, a new convoy of vehicles approached from the main road, FBI and Homeland Security, based on their markings. A tall woman in a tactical FBI windbreaker approached Maya as she finished securing the neutralized device for transport. Sergeant Chen? The agent asked, extending her hand. Special Agent Ramsey, FBI Counterterrorism. I understand you're the one who disarmed the device. Maya nodded, still processing the revelation about Jackson. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to hear exactly how you did it, Ramsey said, studying Maya with intense interest. This makes you the only person who's successfully neutralized a Hendricks device. Before Maya could respond, Reynolds stepped forward. Sergeant Chen utilized an innovative approach to the chemical trigger and implemented a bypass technique I've never seen before. His voice carried none of the dismissive tone he'd used for months. Without her intervention, we would have lost the civilian and potentially more. Agent Ramsey looked between them, sensing the shift in dynamics. I'll need a full debriefing from both of you. We have reason to believe more of these devices have been planted in major metropolitan areas. The gravity of the situation settled over Maya. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. Lives across the country could depend on what she'd learned today. I'll document everything, she promised. Every step, every observation. As they packed up to return to the command center, Harrison approached Maya awkwardly. I just wanted to say, he began, then faltered. What you did out there, I was wrong about you. One by one, the other team members came to express similar sentiments, some directly, others with just a nod of newfound respect. The transformation was palpable. These men who had dismissed her for months now looked at her with something approaching awe. Reynolds was the last to approach as they prepared to board the transport vehicles. He stood before her, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson told me about you, you know, he said finally. Before the Salt Lake City operation. Said you were the most promising EOD tech he'd ever trained. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. I didn't believe him. Thought he was just championing his diversity project. Maya said nothing, waiting. I was wrong, Reynolds continued. And that mistake nearly got people killed today, if you hadn't disobeyed my direct order. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. They both knew what would have happened. We lost 6 good people to these devices, he added quietly, including Jackson, and we might lose more if there are others out there. The FBI is going to need your expertise. I'll do whatever's needed. Maya responded simply. Reynolds nodded, then extended his hand. If you ever want a position on my permanent team after certification, it's yours. No questions asked. Maya looked at his offered hand, the same hand that had pointed at her while delivering countless insults, the same hand that had tried to hold her back at every opportunity. She thought about refusing, about telling him exactly what she thought of his sudden change of heart. Instead, she shook it firmly. This wasn't about Reynolds or his approval. It was about the mission and the lives that depended on it. "Let's focus on finding the other devices first," she said. "Then we can talk about teams." The debriefing at command headquarters lasted well into the night. Maya walked the FBI team through every detail of the device, its construction, its triggering mechanisms, and most importantly, the techniques she'd used to neutralize it. Agent Ramsey recorded everything, occasionally stopping Maya to clarify technical points that would be critical for other EOD teams facing similar threats. "Based on the components and design philosophy, we believe these devices are the work of former Army engineer Marcus Hendricks," Ramsey explained, showing Maya and Reynolds a personnel file. "Dishonorably discharged 3 years ago after exhibiting increasingly radical anti-government views. He's been off the grid since, but intelligence suggests he's working with a domestic terrorist cell targeting military and law enforcement facilities." Maya studied the file, committing Hendricks' face to memory. This was the man responsible for Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's death, and potentially many more if his remaining devices weren't found and neutralized. "We've identified 3 potential target locations based on the intelligence gathered from today's device," Ramsey continued. "Denver Federal Building, Minneapolis Police Headquarters, and Chicago Transit Authority. We have EOD teams en route to all 3, but none of them have experience with this specific device type." "They'll need detailed instructions," Maya said, already thinking about how to codify her approach into a step-by-step protocol other teams could follow. "And even then, there are variables that can't be anticipated. These devices are designed to adapt to standard EOD techniques." Reynolds, who had remained unusually quiet throughout the debriefing, finally spoke up. "They need more than instructions. They need someone who's actually defeated one of these things." He looked directly at Maya. "They need you on site." Agent Ramsey nodded in agreement. "That's exactly what I was thinking. Sergeant Chen, we'd like you to join the response team in Chicago. That's our highest probability target based on chatter we've intercepted. You'd be there to advise the local EOD unit." Maya felt the weight of the request. Chicago was hundreds of miles away, and the threat was imminent. She'd be leaving the training program just days before certification, potentially sacrificing everything she'd worked toward. But then she thought of Lieutenant Colonel Jackson and the 5 others who had died in Salt Lake City. She thought of the innocent lives that could be lost if another device detonated in a crowded transit system. "When do we leave?" she asked simply. "Transport is being arranged now," Ramsey replied. "Wheels up in 30 minutes." As the meeting concluded, Reynolds pulled Maya aside. "This isn't standard protocol," he said quietly. "Uncertified EOD techs don't get deployed as advisors to major cities, but these aren't standard circumstances. I'm aware of that, Master Sergeant. What you did today—" Reynolds hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "Jackson would have been proud. And he was right about you all along." For the first time in months, Maya allowed herself a small smile. "He usually was right about most things." "The certification board meets next week," Reynolds continued. "I'll make sure they know what happened here today. Whatever comes next in Chicago, you've earned your place in this program." Maya appreciated the gesture, but her mind was already in Chicago, mentally preparing for what awaited her there. Certification, Reynolds' approval, these things that had seemed so important just hours ago now felt secondary to the mission ahead. "Thank you, Master Sergeant, but right now, I'm more concerned about finding those other devices." Reynolds nodded, understanding. "Good luck in Chicago, Chen. Do us proud." The military transport plane lifted off from Dugway's airstrip less than an hour later, carrying Maya, Agent Ramsey, and a specialized FBI counterterrorism team toward Chicago. As the desert landscape receded below them, Maya reviewed the technical documentation she'd prepared on the Hendricks device, making sure she hadn't missed any details that could help the Chicago EOD team. "You should try to get some rest," Agent Ramsey suggested, noticing Maya's intense focus. "It's a 3-hour flight, and you've already had one hell of a day." "I'm fine," Maya replied. not looking up from her notes. "I need to make sure this is comprehensive." Ramsey studied her with professional curiosity. "Reynolds told me what you've been dealing with in the program. Can't have been easy being the only woman in that environment." Maya finally glanced up. "With respect, Agent Ramsey, that's not what matters right now." "Actually, it is," Ramsey countered. "Because I need to know what I'm working with." "Are you the type who needs to prove something? Or are you the type who just gets the job done regardless of the obstacles?" The question caught Maya off guard. After a moment's consideration, she closed her notebook. Today wasn't about proving anything. It was about saving lives, the civilians, my teams, and anyone else who might encounter these devices. That's always been the only thing that matters to me. Ramsey nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Good, because where we're going, egos and vendettas get people killed. I don't care if you're the first woman to defuse a Hendrix device or the 50th person to do it. I just care that you can help us prevent a massacre in Chicago." "That's why I'm here," Maya assured her, "nothing else." As the plane continued its journey through the night sky, Maya finally allowed herself a moment to process everything that had happened. In the span of 12 hours, she'd gone from being the outsider in an elite training program to being flown across the country as the only expert on a deadly new threat. The irony wasn't lost on her. After months of being told she didn't belong, she was now the only person with the knowledge needed to save countless lives. But there was no satisfaction in the reversal, only a grim determination to honor Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's memory by stopping the man who had killed him. Somewhere in the darkness below, Marcus Hendricks was out there, planting his deadly devices and waiting for the chaos they would create. And Maya Chen was now the only person who truly understood how his mind worked, because in learning to defuse his bombs, she'd learned to think exactly like him. The plane began its descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport just after 2 a.m. On the runway, a convoy of police and FBI vehicles waited with lights flashing, ready to escort them to the Chicago Transit Authority's main hub, where local EOD teams were already conducting preliminary searches. As Maya gathered her equipment, Agent Ramsey approached with a satellite phone. "There's someone who wants to speak with you before we land." Maya took the phone curiously. "This is Sergeant Chen." "Sergeant, this is General Howard Mitchell, Joint Special Operations Command." The authoritative voice on the other end sent a jolt of surprise through Maya. General Mitchell oversaw all special operations across all military branches. He was so high up the chain of command that most soldiers went their entire careers without speaking to him directly. "Yes, sir," she responded automatically. "I've been briefed on your actions at Dugway and your unique expertise with the Hendrix devices," the general continued. "I want to be absolutely clear. You are now the senior technical advisor on this operation, regardless of rank or certification status. Local authorities have been instructed to defer to your assessment regarding these devices. Do you understand?" Maya blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir, I understand." "Good. We've lost 6 of our best to these devices already. I don't intend to lose any more. When this is over, we'll discuss your future assignment options. There are several units that could benefit from your particular skills." Before Maya could respond, the general had ended the call. She handed the phone back to Ramsey, who offered a knowing smile. "Told you this wasn't a standard deployment," she said. "Ready to go save Chicago?" As the plane touched down on the runway, Maya thought about how far she had come from that first day at Fort Leonard Wood, when the whispers and doubts had followed her everywhere. Now she was being sent into the heart of a major terrorist threat with the full authority of JSOC behind her. The doubt and isolation she'd faced in training hadn't broken her. They had prepared her for this moment. In trying to exclude her, Reynolds and the others had only forced her to become more resourceful, more determined, and more self-reliant than any of her peers. Whatever awaited her in Chicago, Maya Chen was ready to face it, not to prove herself to anyone else, but because lives depended on the unique skills she had fought so hard to develop. As the plane's door opened to the flashing lights of the waiting convoy, she stepped forward with quiet confidence, ready for the challenge ahead. Chicago's massive transit system sprawled beneath the city like a labyrinth. Over 100 miles of track, connecting 145 stations, used by hundreds of thousands of commuters daily. If Hendricks had planted a device somewhere in this network, finding it would be like locating a needle in a haystack, a deadly explosive needle. The command center had been established in a secure area of the main operations building, where giant monitors displayed real-time feeds from throughout the system. When Maya entered alongside Agent Ramsey, all eyes turned toward her. Some curious, others skeptical. At 28 years old, and without even an official certification, she hardly fit the profile of a counterterrorism expert. Chicago Police Superintendent Richard Barnes approached them immediately, his expression tense. "Agent Ramsey, I understand you've brought a specialist." His eyes flicked to Maya with poorly concealed doubt. "Superintendent Barnes, this is Sergeant Maya Chen, our lead technical advisor on the Hendricks devices," Ramsey replied formally. "Sergeant Chen is the only person who has successfully neutralized one of these bombs." Barnes raised an eyebrow but extended his hand to Maya. "Welcome to Chicago, Sergeant. I hope your expertise proves unnecessary, but I fear we won't be that lucky." "Thank you, sir. I hope so too." The Chicago EOD team leader, Captain Michael Devereaux, joined them at the central table where maps of the transit system were spread out. Unlike Barnes, he made no attempt to hide his skepticism. "No offense, Sergeant," he said, looking Maya up and down, "but my team has been handling explosive threats in Chicago for over a decade. We don't typically take direction from trainees." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "No offense taken, Captain. And I'm not here to direct your team. I'm here to make sure none of you end up like the Salt Lake City unit." The blunt response silenced the room. Everyone present knew about Salt Lake City. 6 experienced EOD technicians dead in an instant when a Hendricks device detonated during disposal attempts. "Perhaps you could brief us on what makes these devices unique," Barnes suggested, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Maya nodded and moved to the central display. The Hendricks design isn't just technically sophisticated. It's psychologically engineered to exploit standard EOD protocols. She began explaining the key components and counterintuitive trigger mechanisms, walking them through exactly how the device at Dugway had been constructed. As she spoke, she could see the skepticism in Devereaux's expression gradually shifting to concern. By the time she finished describing the chemical trigger's interaction with the electrical failsafes, his entire demeanor had changed. "So standard cut-and-clear procedures would trigger immediate detonation," Maya confirmed. "That's what happened in Salt Lake City. They followed textbook approaches for what appeared to be a textbook device. Hendricks designed it specifically to punish that kind of thinking." Devereaux ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus. And you think there's one of these somewhere in my transit system?" "Intelligence suggests it's highly probable," Ramsey interjected. "Hendricks has a pattern of targeting infrastructure and high-traffic civilian areas." "So how do we find it?" Barnes asked. "We can't shut down the entire system indefinitely. This city would grind to a halt." Maya studied the transit maps. "If I were Hendricks, I'd place it for maximum effect. High-traffic area, difficult access for disposal teams, maximum structural damage potential." She circled several key junctions with her finger. "These would be my primary targets. Transfer stations with support columns nearby, where a single detonation could potentially collapse part of the system." Devereaux nodded slowly, professional respect beginning to override his initial skepticism. "That narrows it down to about 15 priority locations. We can start with those." "One more thing," Maya added. "The device I neutralized had a specific signature, a faint electromagnetic emission from its timer circuit. If your teams have EM detection equipment, it might help locate it faster." "We do," Devereaux confirmed. "I'll have my teams recalibrate to the frequency you specify." As they prepared to deploy the search teams, Superintendent Barnes pulled Maya aside. "Sergeant, I appreciate your expertise, but I need to be clear. If a device is located, my EOD team has jurisdictional authority." Maya understood the political realities at play. "Of course, sir. I'm here in an advisory capacity only." Barnes studied her for a moment. "That said, Captain Devereaux has been instructed to give significant weight to your technical assessment. Lives are more important than jurisdiction or ego." As the search operation launched across the Chicago transit system, Maya found herself in the unusual position of waiting. monitoring communications from the command center as specialized teams swept each priority location. The tension in the room was palpable, each report from the field causing everyone to hold their breath momentarily. 3 hours into the operation, the call they'd been dreading finally came through. "Command, this is Team 4 at Clark/Lake Station. We have a positive EM reading matching the target signature. Repeat, we have a potential Hendrix device located adjacent to the main support column on the lower platform." Maya and Devereaux exchanged glances. Clark/Lake was one of the busiest stations in the system, a major transfer point serving multiple lines. If a device detonated there, the casualties would be catastrophic. "Evacuation protocols initiated," Barnes announced, already coordinating with city emergency services. "Team 4. Secure the area and await EOD response." Devereaux turned to Maya. "Looks like your expertise just became necessary after all, Sergeant. My team is en route, but I'd like you there to advise in real time." Maya nodded, already gathering her equipment. "Let's go." The Clark/Lake Station had been evacuated, the normally bustling platforms now eerily silent as Maya descended the escalator alongside Captain Devereaux and his EOD team. Emergency lights cast long shadows across the concrete floors, the regular rumble of passing trains replaced by the distant sound of police radios and the echo of their footsteps. "Team 4 has established a perimeter," Devereaux explained, checking his tactical tablet. "Devices located behind an access panel near the main support column on the lower level. They're maintaining visual from a safe distance." Maya nodded, mentally preparing herself. This wasn't a training exercise or even the controlled environment of a proving ground. This was a crowded transit hub in the heart of a major city. Thousands of lives potentially at stake. "What's your standard approach?" she asked Devereaux as they descended to the lower level. "Typically, we'd deploy the remote unit first," he replied, gesturing to the robot trailing behind them. "Get visual confirmation, attempt electronic countermeasures, then send in a technician if necessary." "Not with this one," Maya warned. "The Hendrix design has countermeasures for remote disarmament attempts. It can detect electronic interference and trigger prematurely." Devereaux frowned. "So we're looking at manual disposal from the start?" "Unfortunately, yes." They reached the lower platform where a small team of officers and EOD personnel waited behind a makeshift barrier. A young officer approached them, his face tense with controlled fear. "Captain Devereaux, we've maintained visual but haven't approached closer than 20 feet as ordered. The EM signature is getting stronger. Whatever's in there, it's active." Devereaux turned to Maya. "Your call, Sergeant. How do you want to proceed?" The question momentarily caught her off guard. Hours ago, she had been the outsider that no one wanted to listen to. Now, in the heart of Chicago, a veteran EOD captain was deferring to her judgment. "I'll need to assess it personally," she said, already unpacking her specialized equipment. "But I want everyone else back another 100 feet. If this is like the device at Dugway, the blast radius could be significant." As the team fell back to a safer distance, Maya prepared for her approach. She opted against the full bomb suit. It would restrict the precise movement she'd need for this delicate operation. Instead, she donned only the essential protective gear that would still allow her full dexterity. "You sure about the suit?" Devereaux asked, concerned. Maya gave him a grim smile. "If this thing goes off, the suit won't make much difference anyway." With her micro camera and detection equipment ready, Maya approached the access panel where the device had been detected. Each step was measured, her breathing controlled. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching her from a distance, the silent prayers of people who hours ago had been strangers. The access panel was partially obscured behind a decorative column facade. Maya carefully removed the outer panel, revealing a maintenance space beyond. And within it, nestled against the structural support beam, was a device almost identical to the one she'd neutralized at Dugway. "Visual confirmation," she reported into her radio. "Hendrix signature device, approximately 12 by 8 inches, with multiple trigger assemblies visible. Timer display indicates." She paused, focusing on the small digital readout. 53 minutes until detonation. A tense silence followed her announcement. 53 minutes to neutralize a device, that had killed 6 experts in Salt Lake City. "Can you defuse it?" Devereaux's voice crackled through the radio. Maya studied the device more carefully, noting its similarities and differences from the Dugway bomb. "Yes, but there's a complication. This one has a motion sensor I didn't see on the previous device. It's wired to the chemical trigger, any sudden movement, and it detonates immediately." "Options?" Devereaux asked. Maya considered the situation, thinking through each potential approach. "I need to stabilize the motion sensor before I can even begin the disarming process. I'll need a stabilizing platform and microgel injectors from my kit." As Devereaux arranged for the equipment to be brought forward, Maya continued her assessment, documenting every visible component. This device had the same fundamental design as the Dugway bomb, but with additional fail-safes. Hendricks was adapting, learning from each encounter. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness as Maya methodically prepared her approach. She would have one chance to get this right. No room for error. No opportunity for second attempts. "I'm beginning the stabilization process," she announced once her equipment was in place. "Radio silence from this point, please." With steady hands, Maya injected the stabilizing gel around the motion sensor's housing, gradually encasing it in a substance that would dampen any vibrations or movement. The process took nearly 15 minutes, 15 minutes off the timer, which now read 38 minutes until detonation. "Motion sensor neutralized," she reported. Moving to the chemical trigger. This part of the process was familiar from Dugway, identifying the chemical composition, preparing the neutralizing agent, applying it with precision. But Maya could see that Hendricks had modified this trigger as well, adding what appeared to be a secondary activation mechanism. "He's learning," she muttered to herself. Adapting based on Salt Lake City. Maya realized with sudden clarity that Hendricks must have somehow learned about the failed disposal attempts in Utah. He'd specifically designed this device to counter the techniques that had been attempted there, which meant he likely had sources within the military or law enforcement. Pushing that disturbing thought aside, she focused on the immediate challenge. The secondary chemical trigger would need to be handled differently than the primary one. Modifying approach for chemical neutralization, she reported. This variant has a dual-phase trigger system. Maya selected a different compound from her kit, one designed for more volatile substances. With microscopic precision, she applied it to both trigger housings simultaneously, watching as the chemicals gradually stabilized. "Chemical components neutralized," she announced after confirming the reaction was complete. 26 minutes remaining on the timer, moving to the electrical system. The next phase was the most dangerous, disabling the complex web of wires and circuits that connected the trigger mechanisms to the main charge. One wrong cut, one misidentified wire, and the failsafe would activate instantly. Maya traced each circuit pathway methodically, identifying the real connections amid the decoys. Hendricks had outdone himself this time. The wiring was even more counterintuitive than before, with multiple dummy circuits designed to look like critical pathways. "Found primary circuit," she reported after several tense minutes. "Preparing bypass installation." As at Dugway, she applied the conductive gel to maintain continuity while she inserted her custom bypass circuit. But this time, she noticed something different. A secondary monitoring circuit that would detect the bypass itself. He anticipated this technique, she realized aloud. He's countering the exact method I used at Dugway. The realization sent a chill through her. How could Hendricks have known about her specific bypass technique? It wasn't standard EOD procedure. It was something she'd developed herself. Unless someone had told him, Maya pushed the disturbing thought aside. She needed a new approach, and she needed it now. The timer showed just 19 minutes remaining. "Change of strategy," she announced. "Direct neutralization isn't viable. Switching to gradual power drain technique." This was a theoretical approach she'd studied but never implemented, gradually drawing power from the device's batteries while maintaining the circuit integrity, essentially starving the detonator of the energy it needed to function. Maya connected specialized equipment to the device's power sources, carefully calibrating the drain rate. Too fast, and the device would detect the power loss and detonate. Too slow, and the timer would reach 0 before the process was complete. Power drain initiated, she reported. Estimated completion in 17 minutes. It would be close, dangerously close. If her calculations were off by even a few seconds, the device would detonate as the timer reached 0. The minutes crept by in tense silence as Maya monitored the power levels, making micro-adjustments to maintain the optimal drain rate. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool underground air, her focus absolute. 15% power remaining, she reported at the 10-minute mark. Drain rate stable. At the 5-minute mark, the device's power had dropped to below 50% progress, but not fast enough. The timer continued its relentless countdown. Increasing drain rate, Maya decided, making a calculated adjustment. Risk of detection increased, but necessary to complete before detonation. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute 30 seconds. The device's power levels were dropping rapidly now, hovering just above the critical threshold. If she could get it below 20% before the timer hit 0, the detonator wouldn't have sufficient energy to trigger the main charge. 30 seconds, she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her system. Power at 22%. 20 seconds. Power at 21%. 10 seconds. 20% exactly. Everyone brace, Maya warned as the timer reached the final seconds. If she was wrong, if her calculations were off by even a fraction, the timer hit 0. The device emitted a faint click as the detonator attempted to activate, but lacked the necessary power to complete the circuit. The indicator lights flickered once, then went dark. For several long seconds, Maya remained perfectly still, waiting for any sign of a delayed trigger. When none came, she exhaled slowly. "Device neutralized," she announced, her voice remarkably calm considering the circumstances. Power successfully drained below activation threshold. Were clear. The relief that flooded the radio channel was palpable. In the distance, she could hear spontaneous applause from the EOD team and police officers who had been holding their breath for the past hour. Maya carefully disconnected her equipment and began the process of securing the neutralized device for transport and analysis. As she worked, Captain Devereaux approached, maintaining a respectful distance until she gave the all-clear signal. That was... He seemed at a loss for words. "I've never seen anything like it." Maya continued her documentation, ensuring every component was properly recorded before removal. The power drain technique isn't in the standard manual. It was theoretical, something I'd been developing as an alternative approach. "Well, it just saved a lot of lives," Devereaux said simply. "Including ours." As they carefully removed the neutralized device, Maya's mind was already racing ahead. If this bomb had been placed here, there could be others. Chicago might not be the only target. Her suspicions were confirmed when Agent Ramsey rushed toward them, phone in hand. "We've got reports of similar EM signatures detected in Minneapolis and Denver. Both local EOD teams are standing by for your instructions." Maya felt the weight of responsibility settling over her. 3 cities, 3 devices, and she was the only person who had successfully neutralized one. "I need secure video links to both teams immediately," she said, "and the device needs to be transported to a secure facility where I can document the exact configuration for their reference." As they emerged from the station into the early morning light, Maya was surprised to see a crowd had gathered behind the police barricades. Word had spread about the bomb threat and the successful disposal operation. When the officers and EOD team appeared with Maya among them, spontaneous cheers erupted from the assembled onlookers. Devereaux noticed her discomfort with the attention. "Get used to it, Chen. Today, you're a hero." Maya shook her head. "Today I just did my job, and it's not finished yet." The FBI had established a temporary command center in a secure location near the Chicago field office. Here, Maya worked tirelessly to document every aspect of the neutralized device, creating detailed instructions for the Minneapolis and Denver teams facing similar threats. Through secure video links, she guided both teams through the power drain technique she had developed, answering questions and adapting the approach based on the specific variations they encountered. It was a race against time, particularly in Minneapolis, where the device's timer had already been counting down when discovered. By late afternoon, reports came in that both cities had successfully neutralized their devices. No casualties, no detonations. 3 cities saved in a single day. As Maya finally allowed herself to sit, the exhaustion of the past 36 hours catching up with her all at once, Agent Ramsey approached with a satellite phone. "Someone wants to speak with you," she said, handing Maya the phone. "Sergeant Chen speaking," Maya answered, too tired to wonder who might be calling. "Sergeant Chen, this is the President of the United States." Maya sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. "Yes, Mr. President. I've been briefed on your actions today in Chicago, as well as your critical assistance to the Minneapolis and Denver operations," the President continued. "It's not an exaggeration to say that you've prevented what could have been one of the deadliest terrorist attacks on American soil." "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job. From what I understand, you did far more than that. General Mitchell tells me you developed a new disposal technique on the spot, one that wasn't in any manual or training program." "Yes, sir." The situation required adaptation. There was a moment of appreciative silence before the President spoke again. "Sergeant Chen, when you return to Washington, I'd like to meet with you personally. Your country owes you a debt of gratitude." After the call ended, Maya handed the phone back to Ramsey, trying to process what had just happened. A month ago, she had been fighting for basic respect in a training program. Today, she had spoken with the President of the United States about preventing a multi-city terrorist attack. "Quite a day," Ramsey commented with a knowing smile. "It's not over yet," Maya replied, her focus returning to the neutralized device. "We still need to find Hendricks before he tries again." The FBI forensics team had been analyzing the components from all 3 devices, looking for any trace evidence that might lead them to Hendricks or his workshop. Late that evening, they found their first solid lead. "The circuit boards have unique manufacturing signatures," the lead forensic technician explained, showing Maya and Ramsey the microscopic markings. "They were all produced at a facility in northern Michigan that closed 3 years ago. When Hendricks went off the grid," Ramsey noted, "the connection immediate." "Exactly. He must have acquired surplus equipment or stockpiled components before disappearing." Within hours, the FBI had narrowed down potential locations in northern Michigan where Hendricks might be operating. Satellite imagery identified several abandoned industrial sites that showed signs of recent activity: power usage, vehicle tracks, supply deliveries. "We're coordinating with the Michigan field office and local SWAT," Ramsey informed Maya as they reviewed the potential targets. "Raids will be conducted simultaneously at dawn." Maya studied the locations, something nagging at her. "These are too obvious," she said finally. "Hendricks is meticulous, adaptive. He wouldn't operate somewhere this easily identified." "You have another theory?" Ramsey asked. Maya considered the psychological profile she'd been developing of Hendricks based on his devices. "He's someone who thinks counterintuitively, who anticipates standard approaches, and counters them. He'd choose a location no one would think to look." She pointed to the map, indicating an area away from the abandoned industrial zones. "What's here?" "That's the former base commander's residence from when the military had a presence in the area. It's been abandoned since the base closed." "That's where he'd be," Maya said with conviction. "Hiding in plain sight in a place connected to the military he resents, but still separate from it. It fits his psychological pattern." Ramsey studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll redirect a team there first, if you're right." "If I'm right, we'll find his workshop, and possibly more devices in production." Dawn broke over the Michigan forest as the FBI tactical team approached the former commander's residence. A sprawling house set back from the main road, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. Maya, against Ramsey's initial objections, had insisted on accompanying the team as a technical advisor. "If there are devices inside, you'll need immediate assessment," she had argued. "There's no time to send photos back and forth." Now, dressed in tactical gear with the FBI team, she watched as they established a perimeter around the property. Thermal imaging showed a single heat signature in what appeared to be a basement workshop. One person, working alone. "Subject is confirmed on site," the tactical team leader reported, proceeding with entry in 3 minutes. Maya's heart raced as the team moved into position. This was the man responsible for Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's death, the man who had designed devices specifically to kill EOD technicians like her. In minutes, he would be in custody. The raid happened with precision and speed. Simultaneous entry from multiple points. Flashbang grenades disorienting the subject. Tactical team members securing each room methodically. "Basement clear. Subject in custody," came the report over the radio. "But we've got a situation. Multiple devices in various stages of assembly. We need EOD assessment immediately." Maya was escorted to the basement workshop by 2 FBI agents. What she found there made her blood run cold. Not just 1 or 2 devices in production, but components for dozens, each incorporating new design elements beyond what she'd seen in Chicago. Hendricks himself sat handcuffed in a corner, surprisingly ordinary looking for a man responsible for such sophisticated instruments of death. He watched Maya with detached curiosity as she examined his workshop. "You're the one who figured out the power drain," he said suddenly, his voice calm and analytical. "Clever. Not standard protocol." Maya didn't respond, focusing instead on securing the partial devices. "It won't matter," Hendricks continued. "There are already more out there. And each one is different. You can't stop them all." At this, Maya finally turned to face him. "You killed Lieutenant Colonel Jackson and 5 others in Salt Lake City." Hendricks showed no remorse, only professional interest. "The Salt Lake team made basic mistakes. They followed the manual instead of thinking creatively." "They were good people," Maya said quietly. "With families, with lives." "They were tools of a corrupt system," Hendricks replied coldly. "Just like you." Maya studied him for a moment, seeing not a mastermind or a monster, but a bitter, broken man who had channeled his resentment into destruction. "You're wrong," she said simply. "And you failed. Chicago, Minneapolis, Denver, all your devices neutralized. No casualties." For the first time, Hendricks's composure cracked slightly. "Impossible." The Chicago device had countermeasures for every standard approach. "I don't use standard approaches," Maya replied. Then she turned her back on him and returned to securing his workshop, denying him the satisfaction of further engagement. The FBI forensic team arrived to process the scene, and as they worked, Agent Ramsey pulled Maya aside. "Hendricks's comment about more out there, we need to take that seriously. Are there other devices already planted that we don't know about?" Maya considered the workshop, the components, the designs she'd seen. "It's possible, but I don't think so." The Chicago, Minneapolis, and Denver devices were a coordinated attack. Based on the materials here, he was preparing for a second wave, but hadn't deployed yet. "You seem certain." "The designs I'm seeing here are evolutions of what we found in Chicago. Improvements, adaptations based on how those were neutralized." He wouldn't have had time to implement these changes in devices already deployed. Ramsey nodded, relieved. "Still, we'll maintain heightened alert and continue scanning major urban centers." As the FBI completed their work, Maya found herself drawn to a desk in the corner of the workshop. Unlike the cluttered workbenches, this space was meticulously organized and contained files and photographs of EOD teams from across the country. Among them was a file labeled Jackson, containing detailed information about Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's EOD career, techniques, and approaches. Next to it was a newer file labeled Chen. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were photographs of her at Fort Leonard Wood, training reports, even notes about her theoretical approaches to complex devices. The final entry was from just days ago, details about her successful neutralization of the Dugway device. "He was studying you," Ramsey said, looking over Maya's shoulder. "Just like you were studying him." "But how did he get this information?" Maya asked, disturbed by the detailed knowledge Hendricks had accumulated. "Some of this is classified. Training evaluations, technical approaches I developed myself." Ramsey's expression darkened. "We've suspected for some time that Hendricks had a source inside the military or law enforcement. This confirms it." The implications were chilling. Someone had been feeding Hendricks information. Someone with access to military training records and classified reports. Someone who had helped him target EOD teams and adapt his devices to counter their techniques. "We need to find the source," Maya said firmly, "before they help someone else." "Already working on it," Ramsey assured her. Based on the access level needed for this information, we've narrowed it down to a handful of possibilities. As they prepared to leave the scene, Maya took one last look at Hendrix's workshop, the place where so much death had been designed with such clinical precision. In a strange way, understanding his methods had forced her to think beyond her training, to develop new approaches that ultimately saved lives. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to destroy EOD technicians, Hendrix had inadvertently pushed the field to evolve. The military transport plane back to Washington, D.C. was considerably more crowded than the one that had brought Maya to Chicago just 36 hours earlier. FBI agents, evidence teams, and several high-ranking military officials filled the cabin, all converging on the Capitol for debriefings about the Hendrix case. Maya sat quietly by a window, watching the landscape pass below. The events of the past 2 days felt surreal, from being the outsider in a training program to preventing a multi-city terrorist attack and capturing one of the country's most wanted domestic terrorists. General Mitchell settled into the seat beside her, his expression unreadable. "Quite a journey you've had, Sergeant Chen." "Yes, sir," she replied simply. "I've reviewed your file," he continued. "Outstanding technical scores, innovative theoretical work, perfect performance under pressure. And yet, somehow, you were facing an uphill battle at Fort Leonard Wood." Maya chose her words carefully. "The EOD community has certain traditions, sir. Change comes slowly." "Too slowly," Mitchell said grimly. "If Reynolds and the others had succeeded in washing you out, we might be looking at thousands of casualties across 3 cities today." He handed her a folder with classified markings. "This is your new assignment. Effective immediately upon completion of your debrief in Washington, you're being transferred to the Joint Special Operations Command's Counter-IED Task Force as the lead technical specialist." Maya stared at the folder in surprise. The position was typically held by someone at least 2 ranks above her, with years more experience. "Sir, I haven't even completed the certification program." Mitchell gave a short laugh. "Sergeant, you've just done something no one else in the EOD community could do. You've earned more than a certification." As Maya opened the folder to review the details of her new assignment, Mitchell added, "There's something else you should know. We've identified Hendrix's source inside the military." Maya looked up sharply. "Who?" "Master Sergeant Victor Reynolds?" The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Reynolds, the man who had systematically undermined her, who had tried repeatedly to force her out of the program, had been feeding information to Hendrix all along. "The evidence is conclusive," Mitchell continued. "Financial transactions, communications, classified information that only someone in his position would have access to. He's been taken into custody at Fort Leonard Wood." Maya struggled to process this information. All those months of harassment and sabotage hadn't just been about gender bias or tradition. Reynolds had been actively working with a domestic terrorist. Perhaps he had recognized her potential from the beginning, seen her as a threat to Hendrix's operations. "Lieutenant Colonel Jackson suspected something wasn't right," Mitchell added. "That's why he was so protective of you and your training. He believed there was a leak but couldn't identify the source before Salt Lake City." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Jackson had been deliberately targeted in Salt Lake City because he was getting too close to the truth. And Maya had been targeted at Fort Leonard Wood because she represented the kind of thinking that could defeat Hendrix's devices. "Reynolds will face court-martial for treason," Mitchell concluded. "But that doesn't undo the damage he's done, or the lives lost because of his actions." Maya thought about all the times Reynolds had tried to force her to follow standard protocol, approaches that would have been fatal when facing Hendrix's devices. He hadn't just been a biased instructor. He had been actively trying to ensure that no one in the program developed the skills needed to counter these advanced threats. "Sir," she said finally, "I'd like to request something for my new assignment." "Name it." "I want to develop a complete overhaul of EOD training protocols. The current approach is too rigid, too predictable. It's what Hendrix exploited, and what others will exploit in the future." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Seems like you've been thinking about this for some time." "Since my first day at Fort Leonard Wood," Maya confirmed. "We need to train EOD technicians to think beyond the manual, to adapt to threats that are designed specifically to counter standard approaches. Consider it approved, Mitchell said. In fact, I want you to personally oversee the implementation at all training facilities. As the plane began its descent into Andrews Air Force Base, Maya watched the Washington monuments come into view below. What awaited her was a whirlwind of debriefings, meetings with intelligence officials, and eventually a visit to the White House. But beyond all that was the opportunity to transform the very system that had nearly rejected her, to ensure that the next Maya Chen wouldn't face the same barriers, and that the next Hendricks wouldn't find EOD teams so predictable. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson would be proud, Mitchell said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. He always said you were going to change everything. Maya touched the small photograph she still carried in her equipment case. Jackson in his formal uniform, the mentor who had believed in her when no one else would. I'm just getting started, she replied. 6 months after the Hendricks case, the White House East Room buzzed with anticipation as uniformed military personnel and government officials filled the seats. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the formal space where Maya Chen stood at attention in her dress uniform, ribbons gleaming on her chest as she faced the podium where the president would soon speak. Maya had spent the past half-year revolutionizing the military's approach to explosive ordnance disposal. Her counter-IED task force had become the premier unit for addressing sophisticated explosive threats, while her complete overhaul of EOD training protocols was being implemented across all branches of service. The rigid, by-the-book approach that Hendricks had exploited was being replaced with adaptive thinking and creative problem-solving, a transformation that faced resistance from traditionalists but was steadily gaining acceptance as its effectiveness became undeniable. The crowd rose as the president entered, making his way to the podium with purposeful steps. His voice carried clearly through the room as he addressed the assembled guests. We often speak of courage in abstract terms, but today we recognize courage made manifest. Not just physical bravery, but the courage to think differently when lives hang in the balance. The audience grew hushed as he continued. 6 months ago, our nation faced a sophisticated terrorist threat targeting major urban centers. Intelligence experts estimate that had these attacks succeeded, casualties could have exceeded 2,000, with economic damage in the billions. That these attacks failed is due primarily to the extraordinary actions of one soldier who refused to accept that some problems cannot be solved. Maya stood perfectly still, her expression composed despite the surreal nature of the moment. Just a year ago, she had been fighting for basic respect in a training program where some had actively worked to ensure her failure. Now she stood in the White House, her actions and methods having literally changed the course of history. Major Maya Chen, front and center, the president called. Maya stepped forward with measured strides, each movement precise and deliberate, as she approached the podium. Her recent promotion to major had been unprecedented, a jump of 2 ranks in recognition of her exceptional service and the critical nature of her new role heading the Joint Counter-IED Task Force. For extraordinary heroism, exceptional technical innovation, and decisive leadership in the face of imminent catastrophic threat to civilian populations, I am honored to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross, the president announced, lifting the medal from its case. As he placed the medal around her neck, the second highest military decoration for extraordinary heroism, the room erupted in applause. Maya stood at attention, accepting the honor with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout her career. When invited to speak, Maya stepped to the microphone, her voice clear and steady. This honor belongs not just to me, but to everyone who believes that the impossible is merely a challenge we haven't solved yet. We face adversaries who constantly adapt and evolve their methods. Our response must be not just to match that adaptation, but to anticipate it, to think beyond established procedures when lives are at stake. She paused, scanning the audience where her new EOD team members sat alongside government officials and military leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson once told me that we defuse bombs not to prove a point, but because each one saved means lives that don't end today. That remains our mission. Not glory or recognition, but the lives that continue because we found a way when no way seemed possible. The standing ovation that followed was thunderous, but Maya noted that not everyone had risen. In the back, a small contingent of military officers, traditionalists who opposed her training reforms, remained seated, their expressions tight with disapproval. The battle for the soul of EOD training was far from over. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Maya found herself approached by a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed but with the unmistakable bearing of military family. "Major Chen," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Catherine Jackson, Robert's wife." Maya felt a surge of emotion at meeting Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's widow. "Mrs. Jackson, it's an honor to meet you. Your husband was... he meant a great deal to me." Catherine smiled warmly. "He spoke of you often in his letters. He believed you would change everything. Said you had a way of thinking that couldn't be taught but needed to be protected." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "After today's ceremony, I think it's time you had this." Maya carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a worn pocket compass, its brass casing scratched from years of use. She recognized it immediately. Jackson had always carried it during training exercises, claiming it was his good luck charm. "He wanted you to have this," Catherine explained. "In his last letter, he wrote that if anything happened to him, this should go to you. He said you would always find your true north, even when everyone else was lost." Maya cradled the compass carefully, its weight carrying the legacy of her mentor's belief in her. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Catherine replied. "What you've done says everything. Robert would be so proud to see the changes you're making." The team leader, Lieutenant Rodriguez, had tried 3 different approaches without success, each attempt countered by the simulation's adaptive programming. Most instructors would have stepped in by now, offering guidance or redirecting the team's efforts. But Maya watched silently as Rodriguez stepped back from the device, closed her eyes for a moment, and then approached the problem from an entirely new angle, bypassing the trigger mechanisms completely and focusing instead on neutralizing the power source through electromagnetic disruption. It was an unorthodox approach, one not found in any manual. And it worked. "That's exactly what we're looking for," Maya told Harrison as they observed the successful neutralization. She stopped trying to defeat the individual components and instead looked at the system as a whole. "Found its fundamental vulnerability." "Reminds me of someone else I know," Harrison replied with a small smile. Maya's phone buzzed with a priority alert from her joint task force. A situation was developing in Bangkok, another sophisticated device, possibly connected to a new cell that had studied Hendrix's methods. Her expertise was needed immediately. "I have to go," she told Harrison. "You'll oversee the rest of today's training." "Of course," Harrison replied. "Good hunting, Major." As Maya headed toward the helipad where a transport would take her to Peterson Air Force Base, she reflected on how far the program had come in 2 years. The Advanced Disposal Academy now had a waiting list of applicants from across all military branches and even allied nations. What had begun as her personal crusade had evolved into an international movement to revolutionize EOD training. But the true measure of success wasn't the Academy's prestige or the recognition she had received. It was the lives saved by the new generation of EOD technicians trained to think beyond the limitations of traditional approaches. 5 years after the Hendrix case, Maya stood at the podium in a crowded auditorium at West Point, addressing the graduating class of cadets. Now Lieutenant Colonel Chen, she had been invited to deliver the commencement address, a recognition of her influence not just in EOD, but in military thinking more broadly. "The greatest threat to your effectiveness as leaders isn't external," she told the attentive graduates. "It's the comfortable gravity of, that's how we've always done it." Innovation doesn't mean abandoning tradition or protocol. It means understanding them deeply enough to know when they serve the mission and when they hinder it. Maya paused, looking out at the sea of young faces, men and women who would soon lead troops in an increasingly complex global environment. 5 years ago, I faced a choice between following a direct order that would have resulted in certain casualties or disobeying that order to pursue an unproven approach that might save lives. The easy path was clear. Follow orders, accept the casualties as inevitable. Preserve the chain of command. The harder path required risking not just my career, but the lives of everyone present if my assessment was wrong. The auditorium was completely silent as she continued. I chose the harder path not because I was certain of success, but because I couldn't accept that there was no solution to a problem when lives hung in the balance. That choice led not just to lives saved that day, but to a fundamental reevaluation of how we approach complex threats. Maya gestured to the graduates before her. Each of you will face similar moments in your careers, not necessarily with explosive devices, but with tactical decisions, strategic choices, or ethical dilemmas where the established path seems inadequate to the challenge at hand. In those moments, remember that true leadership isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about having the courage to seek new ones when the old ones fail. After the ceremony, as Maya spoke with faculty members and parents, a young female cadet approached her hesitantly. "Colonel Chen," the cadet said, saluting crisply, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story is why I decided to pursue EOD training after graduation." Maya returned the salute. "What's your name, cadet?" "Alvarez, ma'am. Maria Alvarez." "What drew you to EOD, Cadet Alvarez? It's not the easiest path." The young woman stood straighter. "My hometown lost 3 police officers to an IED 2 years ago. Your task force helped identify who was responsible. I want to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else." Maya studied the determination in the cadet's eyes and recognized the same fire that had driven her own journey. "The Advanced Disposal Academy will be fortunate to have you, Cadet Alvarez. But remember, technical skills can be taught. What matters most is how you think when everything you've been taught isn't enough." "Yes, ma'am," Alvarez replied. "That's what I admire most about your approach, that problems aren't defeated by procedures alone, but by people willing to think beyond them." As Maya left West Point later that day, she reflected on how much had changed in the years since that pivotal moment at Dugway. The counter-IED task force she had established was now the global standard for addressing sophisticated explosive threats. The Advanced Disposal Academy had trained hundreds of specialists who had gone on to save countless lives worldwide. And perhaps most significantly, the culture of EOD had begun to shift from rigid adherence to procedure toward adaptive expertise guided by sound principles. There had been resistance, of course. The old guard hadn't surrendered easily to new approaches. But results spoke louder than tradition, and the dramatic reduction in EOD casualties when facing complex threats had gradually won over even the most stubborn traditionalists. On the flight back to Colorado, Maya received a secure message from General Mitchell, now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A new explosive threat had emerged in Eastern Europe. Devices with artificial intelligence components that could detect and counter disposal attempts in real time. Her task force was being mobilized to address this unprecedented challenge. Maya reviewed the preliminary data, her mind already racing through potential approaches. This would require thinking beyond anything they had developed so far, perhaps even collaboration with AI experts who had never worked in the EOD field before. The challenge was daunting, but Maya felt a familiar sense of determined focus. Each new threat pushed the boundaries of what was possible, forcing innovation and adaptation. And each successful adaptation saved lives that would otherwise be lost. As the plane began its descent toward Peterson Air Force Base, Maya looked out at the Rocky Mountains stretching majestically across the horizon. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Jackson and the faith he had placed in her when everyone else had seen only limitations. She thought about the young cadets like Alvarez who now saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. And she thought about how far she had come from that rain-soaked day at Fort Leonard Wood when whispers and doubts had followed her every step. The journey hadn't been about proving others wrong, though that had happened along the way. It had been about proving what was possible when courage, expertise, and innovative thinking converged in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. 10 years after the Hendricks case, Maya stood at the entrance to the newly constructed International Center for Adaptive Threat Response in Virginia. The imposing facility represented the culmination of a decade's work, a place where military, law enforcement, and civilian experts from around the world would collaborate to develop responses to emerging threats of all kinds, from explosives to bioweapons to cyber attacks. Now, Colonel Maya Chen, she had been appointed as the center's first director. Recognition not just of her technical expertise, but of her transformative influence on how organizations approached complex, adaptive threats. The center's central atrium featured a memorial wall honoring those who had lost their lives confronting emerging threats, a solemn reminder of the stakes involved in their work. At the center of the wall was a quote from Lieutenant Colonel Robert Jackson: "We face these threats not because victory is certain, but because surrender is unthinkable." As Maya walked through the facility, she passed laboratories where chemists analyzed new explosive compounds, simulation rooms where teams practiced responses to evolving scenarios, and collaboration spaces where experts from diverse fields shared insights and developed integrated approaches. This was the physical manifestation of what she had envisioned years ago, a systematic approach to threats that transcended traditional boundaries and leveraged diverse perspectives to generate solutions no single discipline could achieve alone. In her new office overlooking the training grounds, Maya found a package waiting on her desk. Inside was a letter from Katherine Jackson, now in her 70s, along with a worn journal. "Robert would have wanted you to have this," Katherine's note read. "His vision was always broader than EOD alone. I think you'll find that the two of you were on the same path all along." Among them was Major Maria Alvarez, the cadet she had met at West Point 5 years earlier, now an accomplished EOD officer with multiple successful operations to her credit. "The threats we face today are different from those of even a decade ago," Maya began. "They learn, they adapt, they evolve. Our response must do the same. That's why this center exists. Not to develop fixed protocols, but to cultivate the mindset and methodologies that can address threats we haven't even imagined yet." She looked out at the assembled specialists, men and women from different disciplines, different nations, different approaches, united by their commitment to protecting lives through innovative thinking. "Lieutenant Colonel Jackson once told me that we don't face these challenges to prove a point, but because each threat neutralized means lives that don't end today. That remains our mission. Not glory or recognition, but the lives that continue because we refuse to accept that some problems can't be solved." As the specialists dispersed to begin their training, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the isolated trainee facing systematic undermining to the architect of a global approach to adaptive threats. The path had not been easy or straight, but each challenge had only strengthened her resolve to transform how the world approached these evolving dangers. That evening, as Maya walked the grounds of the new center, she encountered a young specialist sitting alone on a bench, studying complex chemical formulas with intense concentration. "Trouble with the assignment, specialist?" Maya asked, recognizing one of the new trainees. The young woman looked up, surprised to see the center's director. "Just trying to think differently about it, ma'am. The standard approach doesn't account for the catalyst degradation under these conditions." Maya smiled, hearing echoes of her younger self. "And what alternative are you considering?" The specialist explained her unconventional approach, one that bypassed the problematic catalyst entirely through a method not found in any textbook. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need here," Maya said, genuinely impressed. "Where did you learn to approach problems that way?" The young woman straightened slightly. "At the Advanced Disposal Academy, ma'am. They teach us your methodology. When standard approaches fail, look for the underlying principles and find a different path forward." Maya nodded, a sense of profound satisfaction washing over her. This was her true legacy. Not the medals or the rank or even the center itself, but this new generation of problem solvers who approached seemingly insurmountable challenges with the confidence that solutions existed, if only one was willing to think beyond conventional boundaries. As stars appeared in the Virginia sky, Maya thought about all the lives that had been saved and would be saved because of this approach, not just by her actions, but by the actions of all those she had trained and influenced. The ripple effect would continue long after her own career had ended, a living testament to what becomes possible when one person refuses to accept artificial limitations. The world would never know most of these stories. The quiet heroism of specialists who neutralized threats before they claimed lives, the innovations that prevented catastrophes that never made headlines because they were averted. But Maya knew, and the specialists knew, and that knowledge was enough. In her pocket, Maya still carried Jackson's compass, a reminder that even when the path forward wasn't clear, staying true to one's principles would eventually reveal the way. She had found her true north in the commitment to saving lives through innovative thinking, and had helped countless others find theirs as well. And that ultimately was the measure of a life well lived, not the obstacles overcome or the accolades received, but the positive difference made in the lives of others. By that measure, Maya Chen's journey from the doubted trainee to respected leader had achieved something truly extraordinary. A legacy of lives continued because someone had refused to believe that any problem was truly unsolvable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.